Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. We're here to welcome Jamison Hiatt Carter and Margaret Ross Griffith. This is a little unusual because they'll be giving they'll be giving a lecture each. So I'll be introducing Jamison first, and then come back up here and introduce Margaret afterwards. Both Jamie and Margaret were born in North Carolina and is now Los Angeles-based artists. They both graduated from Cranbrook in 2001. Jamison Hiatt Carter. Jamison Carter's work investigates the tension between divergent materials and the dialogue between directed action, amorphic form, spontaneity, and control as they function across mediums. Carter's past work has often dealt with a reconciliation of disparate elements across abstracted space. Some of his solo exhibitions in Los Angeles have been at the Clouden Man, Los Angeles City College, California State University, Northridge. His work has been exhibited at the Irvine Fine Arts Center, Giancar Gallery, and in Italy at the Museo Archeologico in Emilia. Jamison's work is held in, among other collections, the permanent collection at the Weatherbox Gallery. He teaches sculpture and three-dimensional design at Los Angeles Valley College. Both Jamison and Margaret collaborated on a project that was installed at the Los Angeles International Airport, and they are represented in the We Must Risk the Light at the upcoming Venice Biennale. So please, first, welcome Jamison Hiatt Carter.
Only my mother uses my middle name, but thank you. I'm starting out with this guy to give you a window into where I came from. Jerry Falwell, as some of you may know, is the Southern Baptist icon, a big part of the social conservative feeling of where I grew up in the South. So my work is not about that necessarily, but growing up there, being an artist is not a normal thing. So it has kind of pushed me in many ways in the way that I think about my work and what drives me to make it. It steered me quite a bit away from organized religion, and in turn pointed me towards science as a reasoning for us to be here, and kind of a reverent place to look, where the place that I was, or the institution that I was placed into in Southern Baptism, it was not adequate for me. These are images of, obviously, our son. It's mind-boggling to me to think that this thing actually exists out there. This is my main impetus for, or my main inspiration for making work. I do look at other artists, but looking out into outer space, especially with the technology we have and the ability to create imaging at such a clear rate, is a big part of what gives me inspiration. I'm trying to zoom in, and it won't let me. Okay. That is the largest coronal mass ejection that we have seen since we started doing images of the sun. That blew a electromagnetic storm towards us that caused the blackout in New York a few years ago. So space weather, it's something that we all have to deal with. It's not just a typhoon in a certain country. It's not a war that's happening in the Middle East. It's something that happens to all of us. So in that way, my inspiration is trying to be ubiquitous, in a sense. So this work I'm showing is all over the past 3 years. It's a recent body of work, and trying to cram a lot within a short amount of time. There are a series of drawings that I did to start this body of work. These are all very small about 9 by 11 inches, I believe, all framed. But they start with a rigid element. Started out with the drawn lines. It's all just marker on paper. And then I juxtapose that against basically a monoprint. You can think about it that way. I don't think about them that way when I'm making them, but that's kind of how they get categorized. I am literally taking that orange paint, squeezing it onto a piece of cardboard, and just slapping it down. And there's very little orchestration on my part as to how that form is created. Here's another one. I am masking out the drawn line, and here I'm kind of obviously dealing with form in the drawn line and also playing with the width of the lines. And all of this is an effort to sort of hone in on an idea. Here, the chance element is the more dominant element. So I'm kind of playing with, again, how much should each element be evident, and what happens when the chance element is the more predominant element versus the orchestrated element. The orchestrated element being the line. Playing with it again, it's so easy it's easy for me anyway, to play in 2 dimensions and then translate that into 3 dimensions to a degree. The avenues for making are much more immediate. Drawing these lines may seem like it takes a long time, but I can just sit there and draw line after line after line, and it takes an hour, hour and a half. And then mask it out, slap down the green paint with the monoprint technique, and then I've got something to deal with. So in many ways, they're tools to lead to the next thing. This was the first sculpture that I made in this body of work. And while I was making those drawings, you derive your inspiration from a variety of places, right? So I was listening to a band at the time. I'm still listening to them, but it's a band, Carp, a punk band from the Northwest. And I guess it was the right recipe in the studio. At the crescendo of one of their songs, they start screaming shards of light, and it's super funny, but it's also powerful and kind of over the top. And I'm like, wait a minute, it just clicked. I can make these things out of wood. I can paint them. I can shove them in a black thing, and they become these weird, awkward objects. This one's called Lucky Charm because the black object started to look like a chicken foot, i.e. a rabbit's foot. And then the wood coming out, it's all painted with the same markers. They're sign paint markers that the previous drawings are made from. So there are 3 in this smaller series. These are all roughly, this one's about 20 inches tall. The previous one was about 24 inches cantilevered left to right. This one's called Proof. And this one's called Powerball. The titles always come after the fact. I'm never premeditating a title, just as a way to work and a way that I title things. It's interesting that this one kind of became more asteroidal or meteor-like. I made it as kind of a head, and then what happens if I take the same sort of mass that's evident in this piece and kind of shift the read on it so that the more amorphic element becomes larger. Same kind of thing I'm doing in the drawings. At the same time, I had an opportunity to do a piece at the Irvine Fine Arts Center in Irvine in their wall painting show. I got an interesting wall in that it had a beam intersecting the top part of the wall. It allowed me to really play with sort of a conceptual notion of splitting the 2-dimensional plane into the 3-dimensional reality, something that I've also played with a lot in my past work. It also they were totally fine with me slapping a gallon of paint on the wall and having it be really thick and goopy. The preparator hates me, but that's okay. It happens. So in this image, the left-hand side of the column that is drawn on the wall, it's the same inks once again, is reflected in the beam on this side. and on this side, the right-hand side of the column is reflected up here. So the piece is called Pellicle Beam Splitter, which is an actual tool that is used in making eyeglasses and studying light fraction. And it was a very kind of an appropriate title in that I'm taking something that's two-dimensional and bringing it into 3 dimensions and splitting it in half through this kind of pseudo void. And I talk about the black being a void, not to really talk about blackness or be painting an object black for its kind of inherent dark nature. I'm always using flat black. There's never any gloss involved. I'm kind of trying to allude to the ether, so to speak, that space in between things. This was one of the pieces from an exhibition that I did at Cloud and Man called White Light from Dark Matter. It was in the fall of 2013, yes. This piece is simply called Exchange. It's acrylic paint, and the black is the acrylic paint. The marker that I've been talking about, the sign paint markers, are the color, and it's on Bristol board. These are larger. They're 18 by 24, stock paper size for most Bristol board. Here's another one. There are about 15 of these. I'm only going to show you a couple. And here they really started to talk about those shards of light too in the drawings. In the previous drawings I showed, maybe not so much, but as I continue to work through the sculpture and bounce back and forth between 2 and 3 dimensions, it's not a Turrell, but the light starts to become kind of tangible in its facsimile. So this started to lead me to, making larger scale sculpture, dealing with the same elements. The black here and in the previous pieces is simply its hand-modeled Hydrocal. So as the Hydrocal sets up, I'm playing with it, and it's a very spontaneous sort of inarticulate act. And that's, again, juxtaposed against the highly articulate, or more articulate, I'll say, form in the wood piece that's coming out the top. You kind of come up with arbitrary parameters to come up with a place to stop. And just as an aside, so the black form is the height of my youngest child at the time, and the colored form is the height of my oldest child at the time, and that's how tall they both are when they stand on top of each other. And that happens all the time. But that led me to this piece. This is called, this is not a spire. It's pinned into the ground. It is pine, painted in the same way that the rest of the work has been. And it's simply a way to really direct the viewer up and down. It's almost like you can never really look at the piece itself. It has such a directional force. When you get up close to it and look towards the top, you can kind of see the pieces dissipate. And it's almost like you're standing and looking at a redwood and you start to get vertigo in a way. Here's a detail of the bottom. It's kind of hovering. Only 3 of those pieces touch the ground, and it's also pinned into the floor, so it's not going to move or fall over, even though it feels like it's going to. These drawings, the next 4 pieces, are larger. They're 36 by 42, also on Bristol board. These 4 pieces were also in the exhibition. This is called The Unfolded Head. And I'm experimenting with different markers now. It's Prismacolor markers, it's Copic markers, it's sign paint markers, etc., kind of going into the more illustrative tools, or the tools from illustration, and utilizing them to my own end. Again, another giant black, monoprint. It's interesting to me now, and I'll go into this further later, but even though this is still a chance element, it still seems kind of highly orchestrated. And now, at this point, I think things are a little more loose, but I'll go into why that is in a little while. This one's called Sample. I made the lines, the lines on the right-hand side that kind of make the form at the first part of making this body of work, and then this drawing sat on the wall for 2 months, and I didn't know what to do with it. And I made a piece called Super Collider, which you'll see soon, that gave me the answer to how to resolve this piece. It's called sample. It's almost as if you stuck this stick into the ether and pulled a little bit of it out, in my mind. This piece is called The Sound That Fire Makes. This is the only piece in the show that has a black element that is not a monoprint. So this is the last piece I made for the show, and it became a lot more highly orchestrated, but less orchestrated in the way that I use the pen. This one's simply called Pinch. And this was a study for another piece and trying to figure out a color scheme. So every piece that I make is a tool for the next thing. Everything builds upon itself. This is called Super Collider. And again, to go back to my interest in science, this is kind of applicable now because of the Large Hadron Collider. I think this week or next week, they're supposed to try to test and see if we actually have parallel universes. I know. They meaning the scientists, have a way to potentially make miniature black holes, and they think they can measure the gravity that leaks into the black holes. If that actually happens, supposedly that's proof that parallel universes exist. What will that mean for you and me? Probably nothing. But conceptually, it's really, really interesting. So what happens in this piece is that the projector of the computer will never reproduce the colors that are actually there. That's just a downfall of the digital age. But they're extremely vibrant. They vibrate next to each other. By the way, a stock 4x4 from Home Depot. It's 8 feet long, 3.5 by 3.5 inches. I primed it and then painted it white and then drew the lines on it. The other end is like this. So you get a hint into the material nature of the form by the wood grain at the end, but I'm also trying to allude to that emptiness inside of it, which is similar to that notion of the black hole, in my mind anyway. This is called Cut. It is an installation piece. It's site-specific in a way. It's not a large installation in the sense that most people think of them. But it's matte black paint coming down the wall. And then I've cut the 4x4 at an angle, so it's kind of alluding to a motion from within the wall. So the cut is happening from behind that plane and coming down, and then the black becomes tangible as it comes into the surface of the wall. But because it's matte black, my idea is that it becomes more of a vacuous space rather than a surface treatment. And kind of the key to that whole show was this piece, Big Yellow Sun. And it's about 9 feet in width and about 5.5 feet tall. And it is pinned also to the floor, and about 1.5 inches wide. So again, very precariously placed, but there are 9 different yellows in this piece. And most of the time, in most studio practices, the cutoffs they never yield a really good piece. People always play with them, but here it actually worked. These are all the cutoffs from making This Is Not a Spire. So that's some material efficiency if I ever heard it. Anyway, a lucky sort of accident that happened in this piece was the way, as I'm ripping these things down on the table saw, and by the way, they're all ripped down on the table saw, you get this kind of feathered edge as the blade comes to the edge of the plane. Because of the different colors involved, the different shades of yellow, it became this kind of beautiful sort of organic end to this really rigid form. So at this point in my life, things shifted a little bit. This is the first lecture I've given since I had a health scare. And it's interesting for me to point out, especially juxtaposed against the work I'm going to show you. I had cancer. It was kidney cancer. I'm fine. But the operative thing is that I had a tumor that was not cancerous on my adrenal gland that was pumping up my hormones, which was making me, I think, in retrospect, giving me the sensibility of a really rigid aesthetic. And as I started to make work after healing from all of that, stuff got a lot looser. Now, there's a number of different things that I experienced that I could attribute that to, but right now, I'm really trying to pay attention to that kind of subtlety in my work. This is not mine, by the way. Does anybody know what this is? Come on. Yes? It's the comet. That is the comet that the Rosetta spacecraft landed on and observed. To me, that is completely ridiculous to demystify the notion of this sparkly little thing flying through the sky. That's what it looks like. It looks like this weird, I mean, for lack of a better term, it is a very tiny penis. In that perspective, that's what it is. And it is, for me, an incredibly interesting object to think about, all of these things flying around through space. And how do you make that? For me, it's the same thing as the Renaissance and Baroque and all of our, art history looking towards nature. This is nature. It's just foreign because it's outer space. I'm like, holy shit, I can make this thing because they have every single angle possible. They have photographs of it. This is nuts. And then I go, no, because they're going to rapid prototype it in about 2 weeks. I'm not going to make it. So I started making these things. This is, again, hand-modeled Hydrocal, and this is the first time, I think, ever in all of my making that I've used a found object. This is Hydrocal, a light fixture, and some resin and paint. There's another, you can kind of get a really good feel for what that light fixture is in this angle. But it's almost like, space archaeology. It's a kind of an absurd thought, but it's there. It's just, I don't know if we know of anybody out there to kind of find it yet. And I made this piece. This piece is called Gravity Sling. There is a phenomenon that if even the smallest speck of anything floating through space has a gravitational pull, and it's going to start pulling other stuff to it, and time doesn't mean anything in space, so something that big can become enormous at a certain point. And this is kind of a sort of an idea, an investigation into that. And you can see things are a little looser. I don't feel like they're as orchestrated as they were before. Here's another view of that piece. So there's a gallery in LA and elsewhere, Blum and Poe. They were showing a lot of Japanese mono-ha pieces. And it's kind of like, a loose way to describe it if you're not familiar with it is Japanese minimalism, but it's more about material than kind of any sort of reverence to manufacturing. And you have these really stark, giant pieces of marble, and one of the artists comes out and chisels it until it snaps, and it took 4 days. So there are these very stark forms. And I made this as kind of an experiment in a portion of it. And then it came together in this stack. The bottom part is Hydrocal. The middle part is a box that I made out of wood and then painted. And the top part is celluclay around an armature. And this is called Mono Hum because it's almost like I took the Mono-ha stuff and painted it and made it look like my stuff. So it's kind of a way to deal with the stuff that I was interested in at the time, but then make it my own. Here's a detail to a degree. This piece is called Waning, going back to the same sort of orchestration as Big Yellow Sun, but getting a lot more loose, and also incorporating the Hydrocal element. At this point, I'm starting to look at imagery in alchemy and historical things from as early as 600 and 800 AD. I purchased a really interesting book that catalogs humans' creativity in portraying the celestial bodies, but it's not broken up in terms of history, it's broken up by celestial body. So it's a really interesting way to think about these things, and to go back through and look at the alchemical portrayals of our celestial stuff. The imagery is really interesting. It also starts to lend itself towards kind of the Baroque. You think about Bernini and the Ecstasy of St. Teresa and the kind of spread behind it to allude to light. That's all kind of in there. And this is the last piece that I made. This is the piece that's going to Venice. I probably finished it last week, and this is a shot in the studio. I'm getting more and more goopy. It's about 10 feet across and maybe 5.5 feet tall. Really large 300-pound Hydrocal piece in the middle. This is the other side. It becomes a big black chunk. And this is the most literal piece I think I've ever made, which is interesting for me because the way I'm making things is becoming less and less articulate. So that's kind of a divergent thing in my mind, to become more literal but more messy. It's kind of an interesting place for me to be. Here's a detail of that. There's a lot of glue and a lot of paint. There's 5 gallons of paint in the piece, and there's a gallon of glue. And it will change over time. That's part of the deal. Because those little pieces of paint are going to fall off and dry up and become brittle. Here's a studio shot, just to give you an idea of, there's a whole bunch of other stuff in the background you didn't see. That's the size of the space I've got right now. It's about 400 square feet, and I tend to fill it and then move stuff, and then fill it and then move stuff, and then fill it and then move stuff. So that's the end of what I have. Now, I would like to show a video quickly of a collaborative effort by myself and Margaret. Is that it? No. Is it behind it? Here we go. And then I will hand it over to Margaret after this is over. Oh, sound? Is there this guy? Is it? Oh, yeah. Now I don't have to. There we
After 9/11, people's relationships with airports really changed. It's a very stressful environment, and people had to arrive at the airport a lot earlier to allow enough time for security. But once they passed through security, they actually had a lot of time on their hands as they're waiting for their flight. And airport art programs really recognized that was an opportunity to deliver a unique art experience. We try and find those spaces where people might be waiting at a gate or waiting near a security line, and really look at how art could transform those areas. Not all the passengers are going to look at the art or may even have an interest in the art. But our philosophy is that, even just having something in the background, something that might catch their eye, whether it's a color or a texture or something with movement, will still add something to the environment. By interacting with some of the artworks, it might help them just to sort of slow down for a minute, just maybe take something in that they hadn't thought about, and it kind of enhances the overall experience at the airport. I think LAX has always had sort of an interesting design aesthetic to it, actually. You have the theme building. It's a very iconic piece of architecture right in the middle of the airport. And then we have the pylons that are welcoming passengers and visitors. As well as some of the historic mosaic murals you'll find in the tunnels. And I think our program is continuing that design aesthetic through the curation of our art exhibitions, from photography to painting to video art, to installations, to sculpture, and even dance. One of the artworks we get a lot of feedback from passengers is Joyce DeLaw's Elevate in Terminal 3, featuring these origami paper airplanes that's been imprinted with the words of the Geneva Conventions, as well as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I think the principles that are listed in those documents are really important to keep in mind, especially in an airport such as LAX. Hashtag LAX Poppies is located in our meet and greet area of Terminal 1, right next to baggage claim. So people are sitting there waiting for their friends and family to arrive, and the artwork that's on display there is playing off the idea of presenting a bouquet of flowers to a loved one upon their arrival. So we have these giant portraits of poppies, and the title is an invitation to basically take a photo of themselves in front of the paintings and upload it with the hashtag. And so there's this other virtual exhibition taking place online as well. At LAX, we have a unique opportunity. We have over 50 million passengers on an annual basis, and we have 8 different terminals to show a wide variety of artworks. And I think it's very reflective of the creative community here in Los Angeles.
Welcome to Los Angeles International Airport. Please keep your personal belongings with you at all times.
As a curator, I've worked in galleries, museums, but when I submit a proposal to do an installation at LAX, it's a very different space to handle in so many different ways. So it's very challenging, but also really exciting.
When we were shown Terminal 3, it was this gargantuan white box. We were a little overwhelmed. One wall is 210 feet long. We had a time frame of 3 to 4 days for installation. So we had to develop a piece that could go up in that amount of time.
We wanted to create some moments of intimacy, but I think, and also playfulness. So we wanted to add color. We wanted to not make the space feel so large. And so one of the first decisions that we made was how to deal with the long wall. And painting a giant black shape was a great platform to start with, because then we could build off of that.
We're really excited about this particular installation because it's the first time Margaret and Jamison, a husband and wife, they're both artists, but they'd actually never exhibited their work together. But we could see how it could be a really sort of intriguing show, and we could see where their artwork would have a dialogue if it was placed in the same space. So it'll be really interesting to watch this one unfold over the next week.
They're the kind of artists who can handle this kind of a challenge, because I think not everybody can. It's about enhancing the environment, but in a way that works with it, so it takes into consideration the way the airport itself was built.
Traveler is not here to see the work. That's not their impetus for being here. They're here as travelers. We tried to create more of an environmental installation. It allows the viewer to experience it through their periphery or at a glance, something that you experience as you walk through.
I've been working with cut metal for the past couple years. The gates that I've been working with are ones that are found in my neighborhood in Highland Park. So I've been photographing the gates that I see every day, and they're pretty common throughout Southern California. And I'm going to play with the architecture of the space. So we're going to cut out areas where there are doorways into offices, and there's a defibrillator that we're going to cut the metal around.
Margaret's pieces take something that we think of generally as a barrier. It's a gate, is a separation between two spaces, and she transforms it into these really wonderfully flowing, billowy environments and gives it a completely different meaning.
A boundary is really an illusion, and you can pass through. And so we're literally taking it and twisting it and turning it. I think as people travel from one place to another, there's a change that happens in their lives, and I think that that's what happens in this installation. The space our work's installed in is a passageway, so as you're walking through it from one end to the other, it's like a beginning and an end.
Weatherbox is an attempt at taking kind of a section out of the sunset where the land meets the sun. And we just take that little rectangle out and bring it to you. And it's a mashup of mine and Margaret's work. So doing a big public art piece at LAX is an opportunity to be seen by more people than we would ever have an opportunity to be seen by. It is exposure to the nth degree. If this work were at any museum or art gallery, the amount of exposure is a fraction of what it gets here. And there are very few venues where you get the opportunity to make a 210-foot long piece.
One of the hallmarks of the Los Angeles art community is that it really welcomes experimentation. And I think our exhibition sites are almost like little laboratories. I think that we find artists who are excited to step outside of the gallery and push those boundaries and really see the space through different eyes, through a different viewpoint.
I'm sort of enamored with LAX itself. It's one place in the urban sprawl of Los Angeles that we all end up in at some point, and there's this love-hate relationship that we have with it. You know, it can be a pain to deal with, and there's constant construction. And so I think about it in terms of what that means emotionally to people. It is a point of both departure and arrival. So it could be a happy moment at LAX, it could be a sad moment of saying goodbye to somebody. And all those things inform how I talk to the artists about it, and ultimately how we end up collaborating.
The art world, especially in the gallery world, can seem very insular and elitist, which alienates a lot of people from going into the galleries. The galleries are free. Art is for the people. It is not in a vacuum. And bringing it out into a public venue like LAX is a testament to that.
When I'm walking through the terminals and I see somebody who might be in a big rush but suddenly stop for a minute and look at an artwork, then I'm just reminded what we're trying to do. And then I know we've given them something to think about, some kind of memory maybe to take on their journey with them.
And I give you my wife, Margaret Griffith.